Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of May 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, and myself, Brian Garish. We're delighted to be joined by Alex Thompson with Eastern Approaches, and of course, Alex talking from the lowlands of the Netherlands. Good news, Mike.
Absolutely good news, Brian. We're going to strengthen democracy. The Tory government is going to strengthen democracy. It's clearly needed. So this is the leader of the House of Commons, Andrea Leadsom MP, and she was giving a speech a few days ago to the Royal Society of the Arts. And she said, you know, when we think of democracy, it's easy to think of just voting, but it's about so much more than that. Democracy today is a society that hears every voice, considers every view, counts every hand. Democracy is encouraging open dialogue and embracing rather than recoiling from our differing views. But in recent years, she said, something in our own politics has shifted. Aggression and intolerance is on the rise. Social media presents a very challenging battleground. And as the Prime Minister recognised in a recent speech on standards in public life, public debate is coarsening. So Andrea Leadsom, absolutely clear, in her own mind about how things are. You know, we have to encourage open dialogue, and in order to do that, we've got to shut it down, Brian. Very clear, no problem. So when she was giving this speech, she said she's very proud of our democracy, that she wants to talk about three areas, and those are participation, e-democracy, and securing a parliament. Excuse me.
Are you there?
I've got something stuck in my throat.
It's a frog, probably.
Yes, a parliament fit for the 21st century. Now, she's particularly concerned about young people and that young people continue to be underrepresented in democratic processes. So she's going to sort that problem out. She's heard of worrying reports online from student rooms that a third of students have experienced racism on campus, and a shocking report by the National Union of Students claims that sexual misconduct by university staff is rife. So she's going to deal with that. She's going to sort out democracy by creating a lot of e-democracy, and how she's going to do that by shutting down free speech, because she said from blogging to campaign videos. I'm sorry.
It's going to have to be the glass of water, which luckily is on hand.
Yes, she said, from blogging to campaign videos, the internet has revolutionised the way we interact with politicians in Parliament. The proliferation of fake news. We've seen a trend of selective reporting on debates in the Commons. And of course, there's constant abuse from internet trolls. I know plenty of MPs that have been sent abusive emails from their constituents because websites such as They Work For You have reported them as missing a vote. Now, for those that aren't in the UK, the They Work For You website was hailed over many years as being one of the real fundamental bastions of British democracy, because it records every vote that an MP makes in the House of Commons, and records questions that they ask. It records answers that they give. So it is a fundamental part of transparency in this country. So she's criticising that. And she said that the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport has proposed introducing a social media code of practice, transparency reporting, and a social media levy. And so it goes on. And then in terms of building a parliament for the 21st century, she said what we urgently need is a parliament fit for the 21st century. And following last November's allegations, the Prime Minister acted quickly. This is talking about allegations of bullying and so on in the Commons. So they're going to establish a behaviour code that will cover all those working or visiting Parliament, independent services to investigate cases of bullying and of sexual harassment. She's going to set a new set of sanctions available to the Parliamentary Commissioners for Standards, and she's going to make sure that confidentiality will give victims the courage to come forward. So to close then, she said, a democracy that works for all is one where each voter is confident to express themselves in public debate, but don't do it on social media, because we're going to shut that down, and make sure that it's not in any way expressing any opinions that she doesn't like, because it's going to shut that down as well. But anyways, you've got to be confident to express yourself. Each voter is confident that their views will be represented without fear or favour in Parliament by their local MP, so long as they're the views that are held by the local MP. If there's an opposing view, forget it. And she said that each voter believes that they will not be subject to abuse or intimidation. So Let's bring Alex into the programme at this point. Alex, Andrea Leadsom there, reinforcing, strengthening democracy. We should be encouraged, proud, enthusiastic for the future.
You've already taken apart much of the agenda there, Mike, brilliantly. But I think for our growing band of overseas viewers, there's one thing I should point out, and perhaps a lot of our, shall we say, Middle England viewers as well. Andrea Leadsom, yes, they did the dirty on her when she was campaigning for the Conservative Party leadership against Theresa May. The idea was she could go for it because she was a woman, and then she was taken out of it because she was a mother. That was what it came down to. So it was a very nasty kind of communitarian identity politics manoeuvre. But a lot of people backed her at the time and thought, this is the sensible successor to Mrs. Thatcher. This is a sensible English lady who is going to run a sensible, proper policy and stand up for old-fashioned common law rights, a lot of them thought. Well, it turns out that she was just as bad as Theresa May. Or, to give her due, you could say that both of them have the same people winding the watch keys in their backs.
Absolutely. Now, one area that she didn't comment on was the structure of the Houses of Parliament itself, but other people are increasingly so. So this is David Jones, a Brexit sort of large number of followers on Twitter, Brexit campaigner. The House of Lords hate democracy and they hate the British people. We are plebs whose opinion doesn't count, and they think they can ignore and do whatever they like. And he links to an Express article, and it's this one. And the headline is, "Unelected Lords are attacking you. Ian Duncan Smith implores Britons to hear appalling comments." And this is a truly appalling article. It says that unelected peers think British voters are not intelligent enough to know what they want. Ian Duncan Smith has said, as he slammed arrogant peers for voting against government's Brexit bill. He has revealed his outrage at the unrepresentative House of Lords after it voted down 3 key Brexit bills on Monday night. Speaking on BBC News, he said many of them said some quite arrogant things about the British public, that they really aren't intelligent enough to make this decision. The hypocrisy in this is staggering, bearing in mind how he has treated the British public himself in the past when he was Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions. This attack on the House of Lords, and my concern here is that, of course, who's really grabbing onto this with both hands? It's the Brexit campaigners. Brexit is once again being used as a cover for constitutional change in this country. The Brexit campaigners are running with this as hard as they can and ignoring the fact that this agenda to so-called reform the House of Lords is one that Tony Blair began, that Gordon Brown continued, that David Cameron and Nick Clegg continued and continues under Theresa May. This is a British government agenda at work here, and they're just falling in for the trap.
They are. Alex mentioned the word communitarianism a few minutes ago. This is one of the key things. We've got a dictatorship forming. It's very nearly formed. We can call it communitarian, or we can say it's fascist. It is nearly there, and they are using any means they can in order to get the final pieces in place. So House of Lords is dangerous still, so they want to get rid of that. They're going to use Brexit, they'll use the NHS, they'll use anything as a distraction to what is really happening, which is a close down into a dictatorship.
Alex, Patrick Henningsen and I discussed this on this programme Monday week ago. But what the point I need to come back to here is that we have a situation at the moment, particularly in the last number of years. The first example of it in recent history, I suppose, is the Lancaster House treaties with the French, where the government is taking action without any parliamentary approval. This is happening almost on a monthly basis at the moment, and Parliament is saying nothing about it. We've got the Brexit legislation and the government's desire to pursue the so-called Henry VIII powers. Okay, that's getting a little bit more media coverage. But we have a government which is acting out of control at the moment, doing what it wants. And the only thing that's been getting in its way for quite a long time now is the House of Lords. And as bad as this kind of hybrid House of Lords that we have at the moment is, the mess that Tony Blair made of it, a fully elected House of Lords under the whipping system that we have in this country is going to be an even bigger disaster, is it not?
It will, because we had a unicameral legislature in the civil wars of the mid-17th century. There were no checks and balances. The monarchy and the lords were abolished. And okay, you can go the American route and still be, as it were, the English common law libertarian tradition, but then you have other checks and balances, a Senate and division of powers. But we're approaching basically a neo-Cromwellian situation where there is just one chamber, and it's not party political. You mentioned people of all three main political parties, and now the SNP come on as a fourth deep state party, as it were, of just a different flavour. They're all pushing the same agenda. Last time we had the upheavals a century ago with the Parliament Act, at least there was the pretense that a couple of parties were more keen on it than others. But now we have the entire caboodle pushing for the abolition of the Lords. And these people that we're talking about reside largely in the Cabinet Office. You know, it goes way back to Gilbert and Sullivan, quintessential English operas. But Gilbert was a lawyer who wrote the lyrics for the libretto for the music. And he actually was representative of this technocratic class talking about modern major generals. And of course, the fates that the House of Lords did nothing in particular and did it well. So the idea of the lazy, slumbering lords with unearned privileges goes back 130, 40 years. And from that time onwards, you can see the British Constitution actually falling apart from the time of Dicey onwards. So the High Victorian era is when this starts, and it's when a group of people decide that they are going to run the country technocratically and that we are just a new...
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, the other big sort of Brexit-related news at the moment is this continuing row over the customs union. Now, the customs union, of course, means that trade can happen without, notionally, without red tape. That's how it's being sold to the British public. And, of course, the problem for the Brexit side really is that a customs union requires open borders. It requires us to be subject to the European Court of Justice and so on. And these are issues that they want to separate Britain from, or institutions that they want to separate Britain from. Theresa May now talking about a customs partnership. This is part of her ever deeper and ever more special relationship that Britain will have with the European Union in the future. This has caused a huge row. So quite a number of MPs have signed a letter, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, trying to encourage her to drop this idea. But this comes down, Alex, to this, once again, to this whole business of Brexit without the exit, that actually we're going to end up pretty much in the same position we're in at the moment, with one or two things changed. And to my mind, the main reason for those changes is because Britain wants to pursue a global trade arrangement, which is outside the European Union. I think the European Union supports this idea, and we're going to end up with a deal, but it's going to be a deal that ends up looking very similar to the position that we're in at the moment. And of course, this is a problem. Now, the question then is, what do people that are on the Brexit side of the argument do about this? Because it seems to me that quite a number of people who are Brexit or have been Brexit campaigners are sort of, there's quite a bit of energy being taken out of the Brexit campaign, because they sort of almost trust the Tory government to follow through with this, despite the hints that isn't going to happen. I mean, do you think that short of Theresa May losing her position of Prime Minister and Corbyn coming in as Prime Minister, and obviously bringing the Labour Party with them, who have a lot of Blairite support in there and are pro-EU, do you see any opportunity or any energising of the Brexit campaign that could prevent this from happening? And also the other question is, the Northern Irish border, of course, is still the elephant in the room.
Both of those points that you very correctly raised, Mike, are, again, sorry to use this phrase a lot, but they're Middle England problems. People on the near side of the continent, where I am now, know about the constant flow of people and trade, and they have this old-fashioned thing called industry, and they actually send goods to and fro, which seems to be not done in Britain anymore. So they know about goods and services and people being a problem. Likewise, in Northern Ireland, there's the daily presence of a border and cross-border trade. If you're in the Shires, in large parts of England and Wales, you don't recognise this. And so you just think that the EU is a few people sitting in fancy chairs in a couple of institutions in Brussels and Luxembourg. And that is how people are being strung along on both of these issues. A kind of navel-gazing view of the world. It's a blessed privilege that we have living on our own island, especially if you're in the middle of it with nothing else bothering you. But no, the parties are not going to trouble their support bases with these questions. It will only be tackled if people stand as independents, not bound to any party system, actually to talk about getting the country out of the European system definitively. A party will not do that because it will be lobbied.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to the American Navy. This article that you've got here, Alex, fascinated me because I can say many years ago we had the situation where the Royal Navy decided it was going to make people lieutenants straight from university, no experience. This was a disaster because, of course, with 2 stripes on their arm, these people were regarded as being professional, educated, knew their job, but in fact they didn't, and this meant they made decisions, some of which were dangerous, and the scheme was withdrawn. So I was fascinated to see the Americans here starting to say that they're going to have people at captain level with no experience of the military at all.
And quite. And what this comes from in the Navy Times is testimony by Vice Admiral Robert Burke, who's Chief of Naval Personnel, talking in Washington about this move to get people up to 06, which is the most senior rank short of generals. Or admirals in the case of the Navy. It's the equivalent of colonel in the other service branches. These are not, captain in the army sense. They would be commanding vessels if they were at sea, but they're going to be desk-bound cyber experts. And what we're being told is the US Navy needs cyber specialists and great engineering minds, and they need 6-figure salaries to be lured away from Silicon Valley. So patriotism has gone out the window, just like the Marine Times reader's letter I featured last time, where a chap said that patriotism no longer drives the services, the forces. It's a culture of fear. And we see in this article also that the law being proposed will not limit these so-called direct accessions. That's hire a one step down from general straight out of college. It would not limit these direct accessions to exclusively cyber. Instead, the law is being rewritten to give wider latitude for future needs. Britain has the same thing now. We have 7 Brigade. I think it's tri-service, although it's nominally army. And yes, the name sounds ominous, but that's how you say it in military terms. You don't say 77. 7 Brigade is over 1,000 all officers spending all day behind their keyboards pretending to be people whom they're not on social media to discredit the likes of us.
Well, the other thing is, Alex, I think this helps bring in corporatization of the military, because you bring in the big salaries. These people are going to be working, we'll say, directly with Silicon Valley. You're starting to get rid of the whole idea that the military is there as a public servant. I think this is something much deeper. But I did enjoy this image here, which seems to sum up life pretty well on board HMS Queen Elizabeth. And I'm going to say once again, we are being very hard on our defence reporting. There's in no way is a slight on the servicemen and women who are serving at the moment. We think, though, we've got an obligation to tell the truth about the pitiful state of Britain's armed forces and the fact the British government is letting down servicemen and women by the lack of equipment, spares, manpower and more. What have you got here in these 2 side-by-side images?
On the left, we have a skit, which I think a chap called Owen Higgins, who goes by Constitutional something, or Owen McFreeman on Twitter. He is Constitutional Realist is his handle with a bit of abbreviation. I think he's the producer of it, but it's a mock-up of the Royal Navy's HMS Queen Elizabeth advertising posters, as it were, because the Queen Elizabeth is now at sea, but famously without any fighters on deck. And our contention is that it will be pan-European fighters that it gets because it's a European asset. And the pilots are running over across the top of the decks, as it were, to jump off the side with children's toy planes strapped around their middle, and one saying to the other, "Scramble, lame ducks, no excuse if you haven't found your sea legs after the extensive sea trials." And in thought bubbles, they're imagining themselves being in, I think those are GR7s, aren't they? Which people strapped now. One's a GR7, Harrier, and the other is Harrier side on. And on the right, to show that this is a US problem as well, the Marine Times. Sadly, the Marine is third in the pecking order when it comes to plane upgrades and spare parts and engineering. They're having real problems now. The Marine Corps is actually admitting now in the Marine Times, which is not an in-house journal but friendly, that they're struggling to operate the F-35 at a time when the F-35 is being increased in production. A new facility is opening by a Lockheed facility in Florida at the moment. The Marines are actually saying, well, we can barely fly the things in Japan. We don't have the spare parts. So, the boondoggle increases, and US and UK seamanship and airmanship are really now in a very parlous state.
Yeah, as a result of deliberate government policy.
And we have the Herald here saying brand new Royal Navy vessel hit by a series of failures just days after entering service. And I have to say, some of these quotes that you've underlined here, Alex, are spectacular. They're saying that bolt heads were found to have been cut off and glued back in place. This is spectacular maintenance.
Sabotage.
Yes, I think this is a case of sabotage. The Herald is a Scottish paper and a bit ambiguous on Scottish independence, which of course is bogus independence because it's in the EU superstate. But I'm calling this the worst case yet of Royal Navy on seaworthiness, because the Clyde used to knock out the world's best warships, of course, and then shipbuilding as a whole took a hit in the 70s. Now we have shipbuilding on the Clyde, but the problem is the lies coming out of the Ministry of Defence, saying at the bottom, instead of calling the industry their vendors, they're saying our industry partners, in this case BAE Systems. It's normal for us to work with industry partners to make some rectifications to ships, but an internal memo, which the Sunday Herald in Scotland's got hold of from just last week, says our reputation has seriously deteriorated on the back of recent operational performance. We need everyone in naval ships, as a department of BAE, to consider what the barriers are to right first-time performance in your area. In other words, they're admitting that they cannot produce seaworthy vessels. And if we go on, we can see why this is. At the beginning of 2017, David Ellis predicted this. So on the left, we have here his evidence to the Defence Committee in Parliament of January 2017, in which he says there's greatly excessive MOD constant meddling in BAE Systems, in this case in the submarine department. And he says production management by the Ministry of Defence reached such a pitch as to do Her Majesty's forces out of an efficient working model, in that case for submarine production, whereas previously VSEL in Barrow-in-Furness in Cumbria had known that it had to produce seaworthy vessels first time, and so they did it well. But now you've got this constant meddling. The result, on the right, you have the Times correspondent Deborah Haynes talking about Mark Seddle, whom we feature more in a moment. In fact, in the same testimony to the Defence Committee that we'll come on to in a moment, but when he was asked about this carrier problem, he was said that the UK will never deploy our £6 billion aircraft carriers into contested waters, i.e. Eastern Mediterranean, with a sovereign strike group. We will never act on our own. No. And this is why Earl Howe, the Defence Minister, is consistently refusing to use the word sovereignty in responses to people's queries by their MPs. The National Security Advisor, that's Sir Mark Sedwill, the eminence grise of the intelligence agencies, tells MPs that carriers will, quote, almost inevitably, I would say inevitably, be used with countries' ships and aircraft operating alongside them. And David Ellis's response from yesterday to this is that the National Security Advisor, that's Sir Mark Sedwill, is openly in the policy format that the Royal Navy's Queen Elizabeth will be working in EU military union.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Yes. And something else David Ellis highlighted is about Britain's Defence Procurement Agency finds new leadership from within.
Yes, this is DE&S, which, if you can see the lower box on the right, that's the same submission from January last year. David Ellis pointed out that his sources say there's 35,000 people working at defence equipment and support, more than all the people in the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force put together, or more than MI5, MI6 and GCHQ put together, and they manufacture zilch. And so the top box there is from the new report from the US-based Defence News. No one in Britain seems to be this frank. And they got onto DE&S in London from their American reporting base to ask why it is that they had promoted an internal chap for the new role of, or to replace the chief executive of Defence Equipment and Support after the existing guy made a sidestep into industry. And an anonymous source told them, well, of course, this is because no one in their right mind would touch this job. It's a very, very difficult job. I think they know a thing or two we're about to find out.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to justice. We're going to talk about Sir Mark Sedwill again in a minute, because he was giving more evidence to the Defence Committee yesterday. But before we get on to that, the new Lord Chief Justice has been questioned by the Justice Committee.
Yes, we had a Welshman, Lord John Thomas of Cwmgïedd, until last year as the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales, which of course is only one of the jurisdictions in the UK. But here we have the replacement. Okay, he went to school in Portsmouth, but with a name like Ian Duncan Burnett, I'm pretty sure it's another Scot in the establishment. The Lord Burnett of Malden, who actually has a decent past behind him as an investigating barrister in inquiries going back to the King's Cross fire of '87, was being questioned by the relevant Lords Committee, the Select Committee, for, I think they call themselves constitutional reform in full. People can freeze the screen to see the questions they were envisaging asking before he got in. But then we get into the meat of it on the next slide, and he says basically that the judiciary is on its last legs as it stands. They can. I should explain at this point that the Lord Chief Justice doesn't need to point this out to the committee, but there are many kinds of judges. One kind is a salary-paid judge, which is a regular state employee, as it were, of Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service. But before you get to that, you get fees to be an occasional judge while being a solicitor or barrister, basically a working lawyer. And so he says that it would raise questions about independence and advantage being gained if people were to return to practice. This is a way of getting people back into the judiciary when they move on. Then he's talking about the retirement age, trying to force people or induce them to stay on past 70, which he calls the height of their powers, not something the ancient Greeks said. They said someone was the wisest at 60 and then they went downhill, which is not to insult the elderly, it's just a fact of life. Your concentration diminishes. And he says, our real problem at the moment is retaining judges. To be perfectly frank, we would struggle to dispose of the business in the Court of Appeal and the High Court, those are of course the most important courts in the land, if our retired colleagues were not willing to come back from time to time to do the work. Then he talks about getting solicitors who are non-court attorneys, basically, to become fee-paid and then salaried judges. There are some hints in Lord's, beg your pardon, get his name here, Lord Chief Justice Lord Burnett of Malden. Yes, there's some hints in his evidence as to what's going on. He's talking about the plebs talking on social media about verdicts which kill people, and how can we stop the plebs doing so, basically. And this is why many people don't want to be go up from barrister to judge, or these days you can go straight from solicitor to judge, and why the retired people are being kept on.
There's definitely fear as to what is being said in free media at the moment, Alex. I think this is encouraging.
Right. Quick advertisement for AV9 taking place from Friday to Monday. Now, two residential rooms have now come available. So Ian Crane has said if anybody wants either of those rooms, please either book online at alternativeview.co.uk or call him on 07791 518 740 to book those rooms. Two rooms available if you want, and he would appreciate anybody that wants to stay, absolutely. Dying for Good Health Conference, Brian?
Yes, becoming more and more important because, of course, all the things we're seeing about health and what's happening in the NHS. Tremendous speakers for this event. We've never had a collection of people like this together before. Timing is right. Tickets are going. If you haven't got a ticket, we suggest you get online and get a ticket for this event.
And also Media on Trial on the 27th of May. Another very important event. Get along to that if you possibly can. Details at mediaontrial.uk.
Okay, well, I had to put this on the screen. It was sent to me earlier this morning, and to me it just said that the UK government has now lost all credibility, because this is a pretty accurate little drawing here. We've got Theresa May holding up Her Majesty's proof of the Skripal incident, and in a very childish drawing we've got the Skripal family indicated on the left and Putin on the right, and they're joined by a sort of green squiggly line. There's the evidence, Mike.
Absolutely. It's almost as good as Netanyahu's evidence yesterday, isn't it? But anyway, the question in everybody's lips is, where are the Skripals? We'll come on to that in 1 second. Before we do that, let's talk about Sir Mark Sedwill again, because he was giving evidence to the Defence Select Committee yesterday, and he said that there are no suspects yet in the Skripal nerve agent attack. He was asked, who are the suspects? Do we know who they are? And he said, not yet.
Oh.
It's a shame. He said that we should just say that Sedwell, of course, looks after MI6, MI5, GCHQ, amongst others. He said that one of the problems was that there's not so much CCTV in Salisbury compared to London, and so we didn't quite capture who it was that had done the dirty deed. I'm not sure that he actually knew what the dirty deed was, but anyway, we move on. He said that known Russian spies that are based in Britain had been investigated and ruled out, however, so that's good. He said that he was commenting on the fact that he had released classified intelligence on the Skripal case a few weeks ago, which supposedly showed that Russia had tested whether nerve agents could be delivered through door handles or on door handles. And he said that the decision to go public with that classified intelligence was taken to help counter Russian disinformation. He said that the attack raised questions about whether the police and MI6 should have done more to protect the Skripals. There was no mention, of course, of Pablo Miller, no mention of his MI6 handler whatsoever. The police who are responsible for protective security and the various agencies alongside them are reviewing the security of all people who might be vulnerable in that way, he said. That was the Skripals. Actually, the main part of the evidence that he was giving was about the defence review, and it's 3 hours of evidence. I haven't been through it all yet, so that'll be for another programme. But that's what he was saying on the Skripals. But as I say, the question is, where are the Skripals? Now, the Mail today had this article: fresh heartache for family of Sergei Skripal, who say they're being stalked by a Twitter troll claiming to be the poisoned ex-Russian spy's daughter. And in the sort of subheads, it says, Twitter account claiming to be Yulia Skripal, 33, is trolling her family. It claimed the poisoned spy's daughter was now living in the US after recovery. Tweets including claims of being pumped full of drugs by Western doctors. Well, in fact, some of the tweets that had been sent out through this account said things they want me to lose my memory, rescue me. Another one said, I'm being killed by drugs, I feel like I'm drunk, please rescue me. And so the question is, as I say, where are the Skripals? I know that other media outlets are starting to ask this question as well. But Alex, I find it incredible that here we are in 2018 and two people that have been the subject of such crass media coverage over the last few years have been grabbed by the security services, it seems, and disappeared. And all we actually have is a statement allegedly from Yulia Skripal, but which was in fact made by the Metropolitan Police on her behalf, and another statement by a senior manager in the hospital. And other than that, we have no oversight of what has become of these two people whatsoever.
It may be one of the reasons why the Home Secretary has just resigned. I think that's a bit sensationalist to claim, but I'm getting a sense of it. Back in 2002, so 16 years ago now, we had the case of a British banker kidnapped in the Caucasus, and I was going up to my share of what was effectively daily meetings on the whereabouts, or what was known about the whereabouts of this man. Okay, that was a Brit abroad, but this is Russians in Britain, but very high profile and political in both cases. And the FCO and all the agencies would coordinate daily with a host of Whitehall ministries as well about this. So it is inconceivable that Her Majesty's government doesn't have regular whereabout meetings on the Skripals because of the unequal political sensitivity of it. So a large number of people, including collectively the ministers of the Crown, must know where the Skripals are.
But the public isn't to know where they are. And I mean, obviously there's been discussion in recent days of the existence of D notices on this, on the whole case. Is this another indication that a D notice is in place, do you think?
Yes, I'm quite convinced that a D notice is in place, as Craig Murray and Clive Ponting have said, because it is, in fact, it's openly talked about by the media. Serving and former, but especially serving MI6 officers, Miller is supposedly a former one, but who knows? There is a convention at the least imposed voluntarily by the press to avoid D notices that these men are not named. There was a treasonous case in the US of Valerie Plame being outed, but she was a serving undercover CIA officer, very different from a retired chap living out on Salisbury Plain who has political questions to answer. So the press is playing along here, but it may be that a denotice, which for foreign viewers is a ban on the press mentioning certain things, may be in place.
Yeah, because the process of putting that denotice in place is itself secret. So this is a wonderful circular secrecy that we have here in UK. Well, let's have a look at this. Somebody sent an email to Harriet Baldwin. I just love it because this is a classic example of people doing something and it does make a difference. It has an effect. So, dear Ms. Baldwin, would you please ask this question in Parliament? Prime Minister, on April the 14th, you authorised the bombing of 3 sites in Syria, which you claim were developing and storing chemical weapons. Had this action caused the release of toxic substance into the atmosphere, would you have taken full responsibility for any resulting fatalities in the area? Well, of course, we know what sort of response we'll get, but let's have a look at the response. Here's the letter back from Harriet. She says, thank you for contacting me about the recent military action in Syria. The Prime Minister has been clear that the fact that this terrible chemical weapons attack took place in Douma in our world today is a strain on our humanity, and I agree with her that the UK and its international allies had to respond to this. Their response was limited, targeted and proportionate and came on the back of, quote, a significant body of information, including intelligence, that indicates that the Syrian regime was responsible for this attack. So brilliant answer, because of course this is all obfuscation. So information and intelligence indicating nothing about evidence whatsoever, Mike.
But she refused to answer the question.
Indeed.
Would the government take
Correct.
Responsibility?
She refused. So brilliant email. Thank you very much to the person for sending that to us. And this is just the sort of thing to put pressure in the right way on MPs, not to let them get away with what they're doing, to challenge them in a polite, reasonable and professional way every minute, every hour of every day.
Now, one of the things that we notice, Alex, is that any time there's a Syria-related article in The Guardian, especially if it happens to mention the white helmets, for example, that comments get closed very quickly. Certainly, comments get censored, and if the comments are going against the narrative in the article, the comments are closed, so nobody can post any further comments. But you wanted to highlight one particular comment from I think it was yesterday, the day before.
This was posted under an article by Diana Darke, D-A-R-K-E, whom you featured yesterday, on whom I would say she was only at GCHQ as a graduate Arabic trainee for 3 years, and then she immediately got to become the launcher of the Arab world's first Reuters-like news service in the Sultanate of Oman, when her Arabic would be okay, but certainly not brilliant enough to do that. So I think she's been protected by someone her whole career. But under the article, Harry Carmichael, the time is too short to read it all out, but wrote a very polite and to the point response, talking about the use of Chechens and Uyghurs, the use of Jaish al-Islam, Nur ad-Din Zinki, followers of Vanessa Beeley and others will about these, al-Nusra and other affiliated groups. He says the 30-year history of internal Mujahideen is staggering because of Diana Darke had been pretending that the West was only calling for us to get involved. And Mr. Carmichael...
Right, Alex, I'm sorry, but your audio is breaking up really badly there at the moment. Maybe the best thing to do is for you to drop the call and restart it again, and we'll move on through. Yeah, if that's okay.
Okay, well, let's bring in the BBC, and just fascinated by this this article, which caught my attention this morning. RAF strikes on IS in Iraq may have killed civilians. Well, there's a possibility, Mike. So let's see how the BBC dealt with this. A source inside the coalition fighting the Islamic State group has told the BBC he believes civilians have been killed as a result of RAF airstrikes. The source, who's not been named to protect his identity, said it was impossible to conduct a bombing campaign in highly populated areas like Mosul without killing civilians. And then Jonathan Beale's article, when we look through it, this is the reporter that's written it, the BBC's defence reporter, it just quotes Mod. The Mod says, the Mod insisted, the Mod admitted. So he doesn't question or quote a single person, single living person, civil servant, military officer, or MP. It just repeats what the mod says. It's really incredible journalism. He then mentions a group called Airways, which has been monitoring civilian casualties, and Airways says it's likely that between 1,000 and 1,500 roughly civilians died in the fighting in Mosul. And it then quotes a gentleman called Chris Woods of Air Wars saying, "It's simply fanciful to claim no civilians have been harmed by the RAF. We don't live in a world of magic bombs and missiles that only kill bad people." So interesting to see the BBC maybe getting on the side of, well, who's causing the wars and the death. But there's some funny things in this article, and I think we'll start with who is Air Wars and who's Chris Woods. Well, here's Air Wars, and what do they have to say about themselves? Well, of course, they're seeking transparency and accountability from belligerents and advocating on behalf of non-combatants, and they're putting out some statistics about people being killed. This would be quite useful statistics, but how reliable is it? Well, look at this. It's a collaborative, not-for-profit transparency project. You feeling happier now, Mike? I'm
Yes.
feeling confident. There's a pressing public interest need for independence, trustworthy assessments. So what sort of people are in this collaborative, transparent, trustworthy, independent organisation? Well, here we go. Chris Woods. And what is his background? Well, he worked for the BBC's Newsnight and Panorama as a senior producer. He also ran the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, or helped do part of that. So this is a BBC man quoted in a BBC article, but not declared. Salim Habib, Baghdad-based researcher. He's worked as a researcher and field producer for many international news organisations, including, surprise, surprise, the BBC. We've got Kinder Haddad, Dutch-Syrian journalist, former BBC Panorama journalist. We'll come on to Bob Bula, this organisation, in a minute, but they're all BBC people.
Oh, independent then?
Independent, transparent as muddy water. And this is disgraceful journalism by the BBC, where we haven't got real people commenting, we've got BBC flunkies being brought forward. Well, bring in The Guardian, because you've got to have The Guardian in with where the BBC is. So here's Alex Hopkins, is a sub-editor for The Guardian and Observer's syndicated news services. Yeah. So these people are creating their own news.
Yes.
But the BBC article is fed to the public as if it's a genuine article. So where does the funding come from for Air Wars? The Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, and oh my goodness, it's Open Society.
Yes.
So this is George Soros funded. This is not independent or transparent at all. And this is the media creating its own media to report in a circle. Here they are reporting information which they boast has come from the White Helmets. And this is some of their preferred sources: Syrian Network for Human Rights, Syrian Observatory, the White Helmets, Bellingcat. This is just a circular news system, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's incredible. Now, if we remember Bulbula, this lady here from Air Wars, why should we be interested in that? Well, she set it up. Here we are. What is it involved in? Media training. And who is the driver for the media training? Well, it brings you to this lady, Esther Stanhope. And who is she? Well, she's an ex-BBC guru in sort of leadership and promoting yourself, working for the BBC and the big banks. But this is all BBC world-class journalism, Mike. And here's the man himself. I went to visit Jonathan Beale's Twitter page. Oh dear. UK column is blocked.
Oh.
So I couldn't get in initially, but I had a cunning plan, so I did get in. And he's got some interesting tweets, but there's nothing of substance. This one made me laugh. He's talking about the close down of the big American joint world operation fighting Daesh in Iraq. This closed on the 30th of April. But what have they left? Well, here is Jonathan Beale complaining that world-class journalists have just died in bombings in Iraq.
Yeah.
So what is this man on? I'm not really sure.
Reminds me of the type of activities that BBC Media Action is up to, particularly when I'm talking about Balbula here.
Yes, indeed. Well,
yes.
To me, I'm sure there'll be some links, Mike. I didn't have time to get into that.
Alex, when was the word independent redefined?
Oh, sometime in the 90s, from my recollection, it came to mean in the pocket of government and corporations. Bulbula in all Middle Eastern languages means nightingale. And one of the funders mentioned on the slide that Brian just showed there was Stichting Democratie en Media, the Democracy and Media Foundation. And I've immediately found an article identifying how much money flows to them from George Soros's Open Society Foundation.
So sorry, let me understand that. What you're saying then is that this organisation is funded directly by Open Society Foundations, and then further by Open Society Foundation through Stichting Democratie?
Correct. And the article in question highlighting this at tpo.nl suggests that this is because Soros has a particular axe to grind in creating favourable conditions for jihadis in Europe, in this case the Muslim Brotherhood. Right.
Okay.
But it's good independent BBC news, apart from the fact that it's all coming with the help of George Soros.
Yes, brilliant.
Okay, what do we have here? This is Alex back, I think.
Yes, Alex, wars in the East. This is Al Jazeera suggesting that a second wave of Arab revolutions is inevitable. Military Times saying that Bosnia faces its greatest challenge since 1990s war and Putin's not helping. But basically what we're looking at here is engineered. Are we looking at perpetual war? Is this a policy of perpetual war being promoted by the media once again?
We are, yes, but because people have got so cynical about Europe doing this, now we have, in the case of Al Jazeera, the Qataris doing it through their effectively state media, and on the other hand, the US Military Times talking about Matthew Palmer, I think a military man, talking about the Congressional House Foreign Affairs Committee, that Bosnia is going to fall apart soon. But these are just ways of saying we can't be responsible for what our client states do soon, if the Russians don't call off the game. So it's self-fulfilling. Here we have more tensions in Eastern Europe as well. Quite stunningly, in the town of Rakvere in Estonia, which is the very town where we have a minimal British military presence now on Rumon, we have a tweet here from Golos Mordora, a popular Russian Twitter account, talking about unknown vandals having stuck a poster saying Hitler was right on a memorial to our Red Army allies in the Second World War. Hitler doing a salute there on the graves of Red Army soldiers. And on the right, I have Willy Wimmer, a man whom you, Mike, made me aware of a while ago. I should have known about him. He was formerly the vice president of the OSCE, one of the bodies set up to preserve peace in Europe after the collapse of communism. And he was also the German Bundestag's rapporteur from the Ministry of Defense, saying a number of things in this very popular Zegersprecher series on YouTube, including Germany's being collapsed. Macron cozying up to Trump is reminiscent of 1914 again. The BBC is demonizing the Russians in the way that the British propagandists used to demonize Ludendorff and the Kaiser. Our German establishment is bashing the Poles and Hungarians as if they were farmhands on a Prussian Junker estate. Our top priority should be stopping the Panzer engines from revving up again. NATO is beating the drums of war. And in question time, he says, I've got no idea why the Christian Democrats, the ruling party in Germany, won't get rid of Merkel. And the US is forcing Russia unwillingly into the arms of China. But the key things Wimmer said, and this is the German deep state speaking, signaling that they're fed up with the Allies, is he said the Allies tolerated us being a national interest country with social democracy as long as it was useful to win the Cold War. But as soon as that happened, from 92 onwards, the Allies stopped tolerating our social model. He says the German Interior Ministry is there for camouflage because all the decisions are made by Merkel. And he says as soon as we moved the capital from Bonn to Berlin and then palmed off most of the power to Brussels, we lost our sense of national interest. So quite an astonishing litany of things that Willy Wimmer is saying. And this is a man who has the ear of German old money and the older generation of German politicians.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, we're short of time, but we've only got a little bit more to cover, so we'll run on through it. Alex, just briefly bring us up to date with where the Hofstra appeal is at.
Through the amazing generosity of donors, we are about halfway or more towards the €11,000 or £10,000 sterling that we need for the first more time-sensitive appeal, which is for Peter Hofschröer to get out of psychiatric gulag in Austria. We've put the link on screen again, or you can go to Lici.com and find it, or via UK Column as well. This may be the last week to raise the remaining 4,000, so we're asking people to dig deep if they can, please, because we have a lawyer lined up, but the court transcript verdict has now come out, and counting from the 2 weeks from that, we think we only have until the 9th of May to avoid the court imposing its own lawyer who will do nothing for Peter Hofschröer. So this is quite urgent now, but we know we can count on people to assist generously.
Sorry, Alex, who is actually running this appeal?
This appeal has been set up by Andy Peacher, who is known to some of our viewers. So the UK Column has no financial connection to it. Andy Peacher is dealing with Lici.com, which is a French-based fundraiser, which have the bogus objections which British and American fundraising sites do. So they're agreeing to collect the money. We hope they will agree a partial payout when we get up to €11,000 or equivalent in sterling, so that Andy Peacher can have that money sent straight to the Viennese lawyer, whose name we're deliberately not mentioning to avoid him being targeted. But anyone who wants to talk to me or Andy Peacher about it can do so. Here we have a Canadian supporter offering Duck Itch, one of her watercolours, for $400 Canadian to go towards the appeal. So you can find that on the Federation of Canadian Artists site. Thank you very much, Jean James. And we also have messages which have been smuggled out from Peter Hofschröer. And these are quite concerning. This tells you the problem. He's being treated as if he were mad, but physically intact, whereas in fact, he's physically suffering and mentally sane. So this is a real gulag twist. In recent messages, he says, the visiting ombudsman laughed at me when I asked him to report that I am not being treated for my arthritis, a gum infection, etc. And he keeps saying that the doctors say, 9, we are not going to treat you for physical ailments and we refuse to send you to other hospitals. He adds, I am unable to sleep from constant pain. The hospital where he's being kept has had the information necessary to treat me, that's the physical ailments, from the time of my admission, over half a year ago, and is clearly being deliberately negligent here. My joints and back have not been x-rayed. So it really is up to the public now to make sure that he gets a decent lawyer on this case, because nobody else is going to do anything.
Yeah.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much for that. And let's say we're talking about human rights here. I'll use that expression, but it's taken an Italian newspaper to start telling the truth about what really happened to Alfie Evans. Now, we are short of time, but all I'm going to say is that if you find this online, the English translation's pretty good. It talks about the fact that his ventilation tubes weren't replaced for over 5 months and they were found full of mould. After his ventilation was removed, of course, his lungs weren't really strong enough to be supporting him. He should have been weaned off that ventilation, but to take him off immediately was to help provoke his death. They talk about doctors not being allowed to see him, and he was given no immediate antibiotic therapy. So this little boy was basically being gently, or maybe not so gently, pushed towards death. Nutrition wasn't given. He wasn't given fluids, so he was also dehydrating, and this is a very, very cruel way for anybody to die, whether it's an elderly person or a child. BBC not reporting this, British mainstream papers not reporting this. It's taken this Italian paper, so we'll say to our viewers and listeners, please have a look for that. Alex, can you just pronounce the name of that paper in Italian for us?
It's called La Nuova Bussola Quotidiana, meaning the New Daily Compass, and it's a pro-life site in Italy. The key point they make there is that Pavel Stroilov, one of the family's lawyers, had to throw an oxygen mask over the heads of the police cordon. And this was to defy the High Court, because Judge Hayden had been told in the hearing that Alfie would die within a matter of minutes of being removed from a ventilator, which was far from the truth, as it turned out. And the Friends just highlighted a Christian Legal Centre article from this morning, pointing out that the Alder Hey Hospital and the Solicitors Regulation Authority are so nasty about this now. They're going after Stroilov in particular for daring to suggest that the family could remove Alfie, in other words, making the public aware of these cases, and for suggesting that Alder Hey could be prosecuted for murder, which of course is something that Dr. Ron Paul has also said. So the state is coming for you now if you make the public aware of these crimes.
Alex, thank you for that. Well, let's just end on these images here. We showed this yesterday. This was Alfie in soiled clothes, and as a lady pointed out to me, it's not a nappy that's been left on a bit too long. This would be a nappy that's literally been on him for probably weeks in order to get this amount of soiling on the clothes. This was the state of his nasal tube. I mean, it's just horrific. But somebody got in touch with us and sent us this, which I find very interesting indeed. This is an email, and it's saying, this was posted on Facebook by one father and his experience of vaccine damage, the death of my daughter Anna. And it's a letter from the UK government confirming that it's in their interest that children die before they reach the age of 2 to prevent vaccine damage injury claim. And let's look at the reality of this. So we've got a DWP letter, and if we expand this, what does it say? Dear Mr. X, about your claim for a vaccine damage payment, I'm sorry to tell you that your claim has been unsuccessful. This is because claims can only be considered once a child reaches 2 years of age. Unfortunately, your child was under the age of 2 when she passed away. This is the state of the UK. We have a rising fascist government which says it can take any child when it decides to, via the use of social services. When that child has been taken, it can be put in an abusive care system, or the British government can simply order that the child dies. Alex, 20 seconds and we must close.
It gets even worse. LifeSite News, which is quite reputable in this area, I think Natural News is another of their domain names, is claiming that Alfie's father was called out of the cubicle and a nurse slipped in to administer 4 injections a matter of 2 hours before the child died. And this was after days with no food, water or other so-called medical treatment, because food and water are medical treatment in the revised view of humanity. So extremely serious questions here.
And I have
and of
to
course, I should add that Alfie Ellens was only a few days away from his second birthday, which would have been, I believe, the 6th of May.
Indeed, and the administration of injections to get rid of children, we've heard from other testimonies of parents over the last few months. We'll end there. Thank you very much for joining us. Very, very serious times in UK, and I hope overseas viewers, particularly in America, can understand that we're now in a very, very serious state in UK. This is a fascistic government. We can call it communitarianism, but what we've got is the state taking utter control, and it will do unless we together stop it. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.